Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for coming. My name is Professor Karen Bryan, and I'm the Vice-Chancellor of York St John University. So welcome to the university and to the launch of our Institute for Social Justice. It's really good to see so many people able to join us this evening, and I'd like to give a particular welcome to the Archbishop of York, to friends of York St John University, to members of our governing body, and to staff and students. You're all very welcome. I will now introduce Professor Matthew Reason, who is the Director of the Institute for Social Justice. Matthew is also a Professor of Theatre and Production. Matthew's own research focuses on the role of the arts in promoting agency, education, and social change, and it involves extensive work with external communities. So over to you, Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen, and if I again can welcome everybody, and thank you very much for coming. So this, as well as launching the Institute for Social Justice, is the Archbishop of York's inaugural lecture for the Institute for Social Justice, and in a moment I will introduce our speaker, the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell. Before that, however, I want to say a few words about the Institute for Social Justice. And the connection there is that Stephen has kindly agreed to act as patron for the Institute, a patronage that recognises our shared values and objectives as we work together to combat inequalities and actively strive for greater social justice. The Institute was launched just under 12 months ago to underpin York St John's mission to stand up for social justice. Since taking on the role as director, I've been discovering that that mission is indeed embedded in many elements of our university. It's present in our research as we seek to develop new knowledge and new practices that have tangible impact on the world around us. It's present in our relationship with local communities as we work in partnership with charities, with schools, with social enterprises, businesses, hospitals, and many more in collaborative and participatory projects. It's present in our scholarship, as through our conversations, our writing, our events, such as this one, we maintain the critical questioning discourses that are essential in maintaining democratic discourses that keep those in power accountable. And last but not least, it's present within our curricula and through our students and our graduates. Universities are places of aspiration, of learning, of hope, of personal and professional development, and of transformation. Perhaps the biggest social justice impact a university can have is through the future choices and careers of its graduates. We hope and believe that York St John graduates will leave with a sense of social justice and a desire to live the changes that they would like to see in the world. Over the last year, the Institute for Social Justice conducted a small piece of research through which we asked some of the participants of different projects around the university what social justice meant to them. This included projects working in prisons, with mental health service users, with people with learning disabilities or autism, and in the context of work with sexual violence. We also asked these participants and stakeholders from these groups what they thought the role of a university should be in supporting social justice. I firmly believe that social justice cannot happen without a diversity of voices, including from people who perhaps don't always get platforms such as this from which to speak from. So I just want to share a couple of those responses that we collected. One was that universities should help give people an identity and a voice which is respected. They can feel part of it and not judged. The university could do a lot to represent other people's views. Another was, universities should bring diverse people together, creating spaces where debates and discussions can happen, where people's narratives can be challenged. I mean, the only way we can transform our society is through education. Whether we frame ourselves as a civic university, as a socially engaged university, or even an activist university, I'd hope we'd all agree that these descriptions of universities as having a vital role to play in our society is truly the one that York St John upholds. And as one participant also said, we need to not just say it, but also do it. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce the Archbishop of York, but first a little bit of housekeeping in terms of how this event will work. The Archbishop is going to speak for approximately 30 to 35 minutes, and this will be followed by a question and answer session led by my colleague, Dr. Esther McIntosh. If at any point you have a question that you would like to pose, there's a Q&A box which you can use to put the question into. We might not have time to answer every question, but Esther will be able to collate these together and select a few of the most stimulating or interesting to put to Stephen in the Q&A session after his talk. Following the Q&A session, we'll then have a vote of thanks from a York St John theology student, Panache Inwenya. But next and most importantly, to introduce the Archbishop of York. So Archbishop Stephen became the 98th Archbishop of York in October 2020. He is an author and a walker, having undertaken several walking pilgrimages, including in Spain and England. He is also, from doing some research into him, a man who believes in change. Just as I have spoken about the role of universities in championing and anchoring campaigns for social justice, so since becoming Archbishop of York, Stephen has articulated the need for the Church of England to engage more directly in social justice. This is one of the central messages of his most recent book titled Dear England, Finding Hope, Taking Heart and Changing the World. Within this, he writes, I want to change the world heart by heart. I cry out for the indignities and privations of the world. I long to see changes and I thirst for justice. But I begin with the heart, believing if my heart can change, then the world can change too. Just last week, Stephen prominently committed the Church of England to racial justice, suggesting that in the context of the conviction in the US of police officers for the murder of George Floyd and the airing in the UK of a Panorama documentary titled Is the Church Racist?, that it was necessary to commit ourselves to change. And I'd add there's also been a documentary recently with a similar title, Is Uni Racist? And universities similarly need to commit themselves to change. It is in this context that today's lecture feels particularly timely, particularly valuable. And so without any further delay, I'd like to pass over to Archbishop Stephen for his lecture, Learning What Enough Looks Like, How Christian and Faith Traditions Might Speak to the Big Ecological and Economic Challenges of our Time. Thank you very much, and over to you, Stephen.
Matthew, dear friends, thank you very much. It's a great joy to be with you and to speak at this first lecture to celebrate the Institute for Social Justice. A few years ago, enjoying the precious gift of some sabbatical that all clergy in the Church of England get every 10 years, I walked a very large section of the Camino del Norte in northern Spain from Santander to Santiago. It took about a month. The guidebooks and websites that I consulted before setting off advised me to try to keep my rucksack down to 9 kilograms if possible, implying that I probably wouldn't manage it, but it was something to aim for. As I set off, I weighed my rucksack. It came in at just over 9 kilograms. I was pleased with myself. I was traveling light. However, after only a few days on the road, not only was that 9 kilograms feeling heavier and heavier, I realized I had too much stuff with me. So forgive me putting it this way. I took with me 3 pairs of socks, 3 pairs of knickers, 3 shirts. I only needed 2. Wash one, wear one, wash one, wear one. And this was an astonishing revelation. What I actually needed was so little. And to spend a month with everything I needed carried on my back, plus the sobering discovery that even though my possessions were now so few, I still carried things I didn't require, was an education in need and an education in desire. And it's these things I want to reflect on in this lecture. What is the relationship between need and desire, and what shapes these things? How can we find a way of being satisfied with what we need and not wanting more all the time, and at the same time educate our desires and motivations so that they do not always need to find satisfaction in acquiring more, especially at the expense of others, or, as we shall explore, at an unacceptable cost to the planet itself? What might an economy based around these ideas look like? And how can the Christian story enable us to go beyond sustainability, drawing on the concepts of common good, self-sacrifice, and the joy of entering into and sharing God's abundance? On my long walk across northern Spain, I also began to enter more profoundly into the meaning of that petition I say each day in the Lord's Prayer, but never really think about. Give us today our daily bread. So that's the focus of this lecture. What might our world look like if it was ordered around the provision of daily bread for everyone? And how might I learn to stop expecting more than my share? Or put it another way, what does enough look like? And I know I have too much, more than my share, because we inhabit a world where there is still so much poverty, and where we can even see that poverty on our own streets, those living without a home being just the tip of a chilling iceberg of need, inequality, disappointment and despair. So for the first time in ages, we are seeing a growing gap between rich and poor. Even before coronavirus, the Resolution Foundation think tank said that the wealth gap had opened up between 2016 and 2018. The top 10% of the population's wealth increased by 11%, the bottom 10% just by 3%. And regional variations, particularly here in the north, are even more stark. Child poverty is on the rise. The Children's Society reckon that 4 million children live in poverty. That's a third of all children living in the UK, the equivalent of 9 children in an average classroom. No wonder food banks have become such a feature of contemporary Britain. Therefore, to introduce the concept of enough is to begin to take what the church has sometimes called a preferential option for the poor, making sure that every decision we make is judged by its impact on the poor. It requires us to speak of the common good, which as Pope Francis has recently described as the good we all share in, the good of the people as a whole, as well as the good we hold in common that should be all for all. He goes on, for me it's clear, we must redesign the economy so that it can offer every person access to a dignified existence while protecting and regenerating the natural world. The worldwide COVID pandemic has not created these challenges, but it has revealed them in startling clarity. Poorer communities have suffered disproportionately. However, it's also revealed an interconnectedness. It may be easier for wealthy people and richer nations to shield themselves from COVID, but we also know, think what is happening in India right now, that the pandemic will never be dealt with anywhere until it is dealt with everywhere. When we fail to share the vaccine, new strains of the virus mutate in poorer parts of the world and then return to us, defying the very vaccines we've accumulated for ourselves. Building walls doesn't create the security they promise. Only isolation and fear, paradoxically, knocking them down does. We need, therefore, economic systems and ethical frameworks that demonstrate solidarity with each other as one humanity inhabiting one world and therefore bound together by bonds of reciprocity. However, current neoliberal political and economic thinking nearly always excludes any meaningful debate about the common good. People themselves are reduced in value, becoming only employees or consumers. The market decides, and with minimal government control. But left to their own devices, markets generate and perpetuate vast inequalities, not to mention ecological damage. The objective is growth, and it seems only growth. Other ethical considerations, not least the dignity of work as a good in itself, rather than just a means of production and profit, are ignored. At other points in history, other incentives have motivated work and contributed to a public-spirited common good. It was Saint Benedict, for instance, the father of Western monasticism, whose famous phrase, ora et labora, to pray and work, saw a dignity in work as an end in itself, like prayer. But now there's only one incentive: financial growth and accumulation of financial wealth. In fact, it requires it. You'd be a fool to work for nothing or to look for other incentives, like a 3-month sabbatical and a walk across Spain. All this leaves many behind, especially in the developing world, but even in our own inner cities and outer estates. But it also narrows our moral perspective. Everything is paid for, everything has a price. But as Pope Francis says, the free market is anything but free for huge numbers of people, above all the poor, who end up with little or no choice in practice. Solidarity with the poor is not sharing the crumbs from the table, but to make space at the table for everyone. Moreover, our wealth and our excess, our growth, is provided by the labour of others, often poorly paid migrant workers. We have plenty, they have hardly anything. Which brings me back to the concept of enough. What we have is more than enough. And an economic system built upon maintaining our market-driven need to want more than enough. Advertising endlessly massages our desires. Sophisticated algorithms mine our data, and Amazon, Google, and Facebook tell us what we need and how to buy it cheaply. So we say we need this holiday. We need a new pair of jeans or a third or fourth or fifth outfit. We need a new car. What we mean is we want. But we have so blurred the lines between need and desire that we no longer even notice it exists. And any drop in spending is, of course, reported as tragedy, because our whole system depends on it. New approaches and new measures are urgently needed. Sometimes we think the problem is greed, which is certainly part of it, but it is also about what we have come to accept as the norm, and with it the price that's paid by the planet itself and paid by so many millions of our sisters and brothers around the world. The problem is systemic, shaped by an acceptance of certain market philosophies. In his book, What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of the Market, Michael J. Sandel charts the expansion of markets and of market values into spheres of life where they don't belong. This is something even more alarming than greed. Market values crowding out non-market norms and therefore corrupting the way we live our lives. He cites an alarming number of examples, from the proliferation of for-profit schools, hospitals, and even prisons, to the outsourcing of war to private military contractors, the eclipse of public police forces by private security firms, pharmaceutical companies' aggressive marketing of prescription drugs to consumers in rich countries, the outsourcing of pregnancy to surrogate mothers in the developing world, to the buying and selling by companies and countries of the right to pollute. This isn't just greed. Markets leave a mark by putting a price on everything. By deciding that everything can be bought and sold, we decide, at least implicitly, that it is appropriate to treat them as commodities. We have drifted from having a market economy to being a market society. Whereas a market economy is a valuable and effective tool for organizing productive activity, a market society is a way of life in which market values, the idea that everything can be bought or sold, and with it, the commodification of everything, seeps into every aspect of life. It also turns citizens into consumers, eroding public goods as goods in themselves. Everything has a price, even things like blood, or friendship that are priceless. To say that we need to discover what enough looks like is also to say we've had enough of this commodification of life and the ethical damage it has done, and we want to reset the compass. In order to do this, we might look at the very word economy itself as a place to begin. In my recent book, which Matthew mentioned, Dear England, I explored the meaning of the word economy. It comes from two Greek words, oikos, meaning household, and nomos, meaning law. So the literal meaning is the law of the household. Furthermore, nomos is from another Greek word, neimin, meaning to distribute, indicating that law and justice have something to do with fair distribution. A good economy is like a well-run household. And though most of us don't claim any great understanding of economics, and I sometimes think economists and politicians prefer it that way, we do all know what a well-run household looks like. Everyone is treated equally and fairly. In a family, a household, it would simply be unthinkable that at the dinner table, some were fed and others went hungry. This approach to life and economics is sometimes called distributive justice. It is a theme that runs through the Bible, especially the Old Testament, where the prophets rage against the people of Israel, saying that what God wants is not their worship and their festivals, but justice. A justice that can only come when we recognize we inhabit this planet together, with mutual responsibility to one another and to the land itself. We don't always think about justice this way. Often we think of it just as retribution, but the vision is bigger and more positive. Arising from its Jewish roots, the Christian tradition has always believed that to be just as God is just means to distribute things fairly. When the people of Israel were liberated from slavery in Egypt, God fed them with manna from heaven. Everyone had enough, but no one had more than enough. And because they'd been slaves themselves, the good stewardship of the household of God's earth extended to others, especially those who were strangers, aliens, and outcasts. The Jewish faith has developed a beautiful and complex system of Sabbath rest and Jubilee, whereby every year a portion of the harvest is left for the poor and the alien, and every 7th year the land rests so that the poor may eat, and every 50th year, that is after 7 times 7 years, there's a kind of super Sabbath for the land, where not only the land rests, but debts are cancelled and the land returned to its original owners. The reason? The land is mine, says God. With me, you are all aliens and tenants. This suggests a model of stewardship, not ownership, for our ordering of the world. God requires us to share what we have with those in need, because all of us are aliens and tenants. We don't own this land. We must treat it fairly, preserve its fertility, share its goodness. Sabbath rest, it turns out, is not just a useful reminder that mindfulness is good for us, but a political act, an injunction to good and just stewardship of the world, where rest and equitable distribution follow the pattern that God initiates in creation itself and mirrors the generosity and reciprocity of God, where work is for the common good, not just individual gain. Therefore, the measure for enough is the measure of the needs of the poor and the needs of the planet. Therefore, from a Christian perspective, in all areas of life, fair distribution and good stewardship should be the yardstick. Fair distribution of food, of security, of land, education, health, opportunity. Just as a good household looks after and works for the benefit of all its members, so should a good society. Our first responsibility should be that everyone has enough. This will necessarily mean some of us having less, but it won't mean creating less wealth. On the contrary, we need more and more people invested in its just and sustainable development. We will make different things, but we'll also need a different set of values, or an old one, to ensure equitable distribution. Paradoxically, this is an area where the poor themselves can lead us. Both in this country and around the world, I have always been humbled and amazed by the sacrifices I see some of the poorest people make on behalf of one another and in the service of a greater good. Often, the wealthier you are, the more insulated your life becomes, leaving you less able to see a different way of living, nor even notice the harm your isolation is doing. I've had the privilege of receiving hospitality from unimaginably poor nomadic people in northern Kenya living through their second year of drought. I've seen in shantytown congregations astonishing generosity, and also in some of the poorer estate parishes in this country. In sub-Saharan Africa and Pacific Island communities, where I've met with bishops and people, their more interdependent ways of living with each other and with the land is threatened by a climate crisis that they've had little part in creating. Yet it is the climate crisis, even more than COVID, that might be the spur to our rethinking and reimagining a different kind of economic life, where we say enough to some of our current models and begin to work out what living with enough looks like and what its implications are. So we all know, and have known for years, that we must find a carbon neutral way of inhabiting the planet. Progress towards this is shockingly slow. We continue to do the things we know are causing the problem. We hope new technology will save us. It may. But in the meantime, we must take other measures. Politically, there seems to me to be only three obvious approaches: legislation, taxation, or let the market decide. And we seem to have chosen this last option, only not chosen so much as allowed all our other choices about how we might order society to dictate this one as well, vainly believing that market forces will always deliver the best results. So we haven't legislated as rigorously as we could have done. We haven't put much of a price on pollution by taxing it. We have instead, this is just one example, let a moral obligation, the need for the developed world to take a lead in radically reducing carbon emissions, to be outsourced to the poorer developing world by enabling rich countries to buy the right to pollute from others. It's called carbon offsets. Not only does this fail to really tackle the problem, it is ethically destruction. As Sandel puts it, it undermines the spirit of shared sacrifice that may be necessary, I believe is necessary, to create a global environmental ethic. He uses the simple example of whether it's okay for a tourist to lob a beer can into the Grand Canyon. Of course it isn't. It's unnecessary. It damages the environment. But now, rather than prevent the tourist from doing this, or even requiring him to go and pick it up, the discarded beer can is offset by paying for someone else to pick up litter in the Himalayas. Introducing the concept of enough, both that we've had enough of a certain way of doing things and that we must learn to live with enough now, and therefore actually change our behavior and curb our carbon guzzling habits, means cultivating habits of restraint and a culture of shared sacrifice. A global market in the right to pollute undermines this at every turn. They are the modern day equivalent of indulgences, which were the payments sinners made in the medieval church to offset their sinfulness. They didn't work then, and right now they only obscure the challenge facing us and let us off the hook of our moral responsibilities to each other and the planet. The new ethic that we need is described by Jonathan Porritt as an involved, intelligent and elegant form of capitalism that puts the earth at the centre and ensures that all people are its beneficiaries. He defines sustainable development as a dynamic process which enables all people to realize their potential and to improve their quality of life in ways which simultaneously protect and enhance the Earth's life support systems. This is a good place to start, but for me, the Christian story enables us to go a bit further because it speaks about the whole cosmos as a character in the story of creation and redemption, not a backdrop or a stage set. Citing no less a figure than Thomas Aquinas as an example, Fanfani wrote that in the Middle Ages, economic ethics were dominated by the idea of not profit, justice, and by the principle of being content with one's status. Excessive wealth was condemned. Each should see wealth adequate to one's needs without ambitiously seeking excess. Now, we may, of course, have something to say about medieval attitudes to status, but what was thought about wealth, labour, economics, justice may be very, very relevant to today's challenge. It stemmed from a Christian worldview that we don't live on the world, but in the world. We are part of the creation, but also its steward. We are children of God and charged by God to work for, another petition in the Lord's Prayer, God's rule in earth as in heaven. We therefore should never either just use or just ignore the world. It's to be cherished, responded to, cared for and loved. It belongs to all of us. Its good ordering and well-being is tied up with our own. To live with enough requires us to consider the common good as well as our own. It requires us to think globally and locally. It puts fair distribution at the heart of economic thinking. It recognizes the moral limits of our prevailing free market philosophies, recognizing that even in a society with no unjust differences of wealth and power, there are still some things that money shouldn't be able to buy, like each other, and some things that simply cannot be bought, like love or friendship, and many, many things that are corrupted by being given a price. As Sandel says, market choices are not free choices if some people are desperately poor or lack the ability to bargain on free terms. Why else would someone and some people sell their kidneys or even their children? Thinking about enough helps us begin to reimagine what our world could be, but there are, of course, limits. Another major theme in Christianity is abundance. 5,000 people are fed, and the disciples gather up 12 baskets of leftovers. The fishermen haul in a catch that's so large their nets start to break. An already inebriated assembly of wedding guests are given the very last thing they actually need, a ridiculously large supply of additional alcohol. And not just any old plonk, 180 gallons of the finest vintage. How do we fit this abundance into a concept of living with enough? And personally, even though I didn't need that third pair of socks and third shirt, there were other things I carried in my rucksack that were hugely precious, but without price, that added to the weight, but I would have hung on to, I think, even if my last pair of socks proved too much to carry. Like the photograph of those that I love that travelled with me, or the holding cross that I gripped tightly through the darker and more difficult parts of the journey, or even the bar of chocolate that I didn't really need, though could justify as a good source for the necessary replenishing of energy, but which actually felt like a little luxury and therefore kept me going in ways which were not just about the efficient delivery of calories. And that's before I get on to the very lovely but unnecessary beer that I drank each evening. Perhaps we need another concept from the Christian tradition to place alongside the concept of enough. That is the interrelationship between the feast and the fast. Not only does our society fail to acknowledge the common good and distribute things fairly, as in a well-run household, we tolerate and knowingly enable certain parts of our society to live with amazing excess while others do not have enough. The wealth does not trickle down, well, not much. This is where walls do work. They create a dam that keeps wealth in. For some parts of the world and for some people in it, it is always feast. For others, it is always fast. It is in the rebalancing of this that we will discover not only a fair and equitable way of inhabiting the world, but also a joyful one. Feasting and fasting should again become the pattern for everyone. With this, we'll recover and enjoy other disciplines that we have lost. Things like saving, mending, making, recycling. Second-hand really is pre-loved. Enough is not miserable. I will have my share, but it will be more lovely because what I used to have just for myself is now shared with others. Mark Powley argues that Christianity outlasted and outshone the Roman Empire partly because of its resistance to the dominant system. This was embodied by an image of a shepherd carrying the weak rather than a soldier crushing them. We need a similar resistance movement against unchecked consumerism today and the monopolies that drive them. We might also discover that the disciplines of the fast, whereby the planet itself is given a breather, and those excesses that we no longer permit ourselves to have each day, enables a more equitable sharing of resources across the world, and therefore makes the feast even more enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Archbishop Stephen, for that very thoughtful reflection on the relationship between need and desire, and particularly for highlighting the preferential option for poor, especially in light of recent accounts of poverty that have been exacerbated by COVID and the climate crisis, and how that is affecting those most in need around the world.
So thank you, Archbishop, for myself. But as a formal vote of thanks, I'd like to ask to come to the virtual stage, Panache Inwenya. So Panache, if you could turn on your camera and your microphone. And so Panache has been given the job of a vote of thanks. So thank you, Archbishop, from me, and over to you, Panache.
Hi guys, I can't really see anyone else except for the Archbishop. You look great today, but I trust everyone else looks great also. Yeah, I'm being given the task to give a vote of thanks. It's been a very interesting topic today, and it actually takes me back to a taxi ride I had just last night. And this taxi driver comes to me and he says, "Panache, what do you think of people going to Mars?" And I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting taxi ride. Okay, right, we're doing this. Let's go." And I was like, "No, yeah, I suppose the advancement of science, as far as it has come over the years, is quite an impressive feat. And I think the fact that man are looking to go that far is quite something." Me, obviously, trying to give him the answer I was he was hoping for. You know what I mean? I thought he was a scientific guy. And I was like, "Oh, what about you? What about you, Tariq? What do you think?" The Tariq was the name of my Uber driver. And he responded and says, "I don't like it." I'm like, "All right, okay, that's not what I was expecting." And he says, "Man are greedy, man have everything they could possibly need, more than enough resources on the earth here. And yet they pump trillions and trillions of dollars to go to Mars when there's people living in poverty in countries like India, in countries like Africa right now. Coronavirus is still ravaging places like India, you know what I mean?" And it took me back for a second. I was in the back of this Uber and I think to myself, like, wow, this is not how I thought my evening was going to go. But it made me think for a second. And I thought I was one of the only people. I'm studying theology, philosophy, and religion at York, St. John. And so I'm encouraged to have these kind of questions, these kind of thoughts often. And I really lost all hope in humankind. But this Uber driver I've never met before asked me and says exactly this. And it gave me a little bit of hope. You know, I had no idea what I was going to talk about today. I had no idea what I was going to be thankful for. But after that conversation and what the Archbishop has been talking about today, thank you very much, Mr. Cottrell. It's given me a little bit of hope to know that there are still people out there who see the pain that other people are going through, who see the struggles that other people are facing, and are willing to come, you know, Wednesday night in the middle of what could be their very busy week, to come and air out their thoughts, their opinions and their ways of wanting to help. So this isn't just a thanks to the Archbishop. I think this is a thanks to everyone who's taken the time out to come here to discuss these things, because these are important things. And hopefully, like Tariq, more of us, you know, will not to look outside of what we have, but look more inclusively in the human race and at what we all have or what we all could give. So yeah, thank you very much, all of you, and thank you very much, Archbishop.